The Granite State Organizing Project is an affiliate of Faith in Action, which is a national faith-based community organizing group. And we are trying to meet with all of the candidates for president. And Beto is our third candidate. We're looking forward to the other 22 at some point. Again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I know that New Hampshireites take great pride in being the first in the nation primary, and we also take great responsibility. We know that that's a great responsibility, and we try to get all the information we can about candidates. So this is another chance to do that. And before we hear from Beto, Congresswoman Annie Kuster is here and is going to say a few words.
Thank you. Reverend Allison, thank you so much for having us. Thanks to the Granite State Organizing Project for your advocacy and everything you're doing on immigration. I will be very brief. I am literally just back from the border. I've just flown in from Brownsville last night to Dallas and to Boston to be here with all of you. I went down with a delegation of 20 members of Congress from the House, and our goal was oversight to make sure that we can see how people are being treated. I come back very, very concerned about human rights violations and about a culture of cruelty. And so it's appropriate that we would all be here together to have this conversation. I do have on my website photos and video. We were very persistent about getting the video. We were, I think, the first congressional delegation that's been able to get in with our phones. We had a legal opinion from our House Legal Counsel that this is our oversight function. I believe that journalists should be able to be inside and take whatever pictures and video will bring this story to the American people. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that in my lifetime, this is one of the worst human rights violations that I certainly have become aware of. We visited in McAllen, Texas, in the facility that is now known to most people as the Icebox, but these are the very troublesome videos that if you look on my colleague Jim McGovern, who was with us, and I also have pictures of it, very, very, very crowded men jammed into cell blocks, cement. They're so crowded now that there's no place to lie down. So if they're resting at all, they have to stand or sit. There's no mats or anything else. It's just cement. And we learned yesterday that some of these men have been in there for 40 to 60 days. They had not been able to bathe. They had not had showers. They were fed, but not in a robust way, as you can imagine. And the only toilet is in the cell with all of the people. So that was the most troublesome thing. The only good news that we saw was a year ago when I was there was when they were first separating the children from their families. And we had met with 40 women whose children had been essentially kidnapped by our government. That is no longer happening, but children are being separated from aunts, uncles, grandparents. So Beto will probably get into it in more detail. We went to the facility in McAllen that they called the dog pound with the chain link fence, and I have lots of pictures and video online if you want to see what that looks like. Luckily, the families are being moved through more quickly, and they are being released in many cases to nonprofit agencies that are then helping them to connect with their sponsor families across this country and coming by bus to reunite with their family, and then they will have their asylum hearings. So I'm just so grateful that Beto is bringing this conversation to all of you, and we will be having more conversations to come. My role today, in addition to singing the praises of my dear friend and colleague Beto O'Rourke, we came in together in the class of 2012. We actually sat together on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. He is compassionate, he is knowledgeable, and he is really a fighter. I watched him go to bat for veterans, and I've watched him go to bat for new Americans. He comes from the community of El Paso. He'll talk a lot about that, but he's very, very knowledgeable about these issues. They're complex, and we have to find balance. But before we get to that, I get the great honor to introduce Carla. Where's Carla? Hopefully she's right here, ready to go, right in the front row. Carla, come up, because I want to introduce you to everybody. Carla is from Brownsville. We just discovered this. And did you say born in McAllen? Born in McAllen. So I've been with her people. It was 100 degrees yesterday when we crossed the border over to Mexico. So we're delighted to have you here. This is a time-honored tradition, picking the next president of the United States. Thank you for spending your youth in New Hampshire, helping with that decision, and I'll turn it over to Carla.
Thank you, Congressman Custer. Hi. Hola, bienvenidos. Buenas tardes. I'm Carla. I am born and raised on the border of South Texas, and I'm now in the Granite State trying to get Beto elected as our next president. And being from the border is such a magical place. And there's also a lot of tragedy and trauma that goes on the border, right? As I'm sure that everyone here knows. So I come from a mixed status family. And what that means is that I am the only documented person in my family. So I take my privilege as a citizen very seriously. And so growing up, I didn't always know what that meant, right? O sea, my mom would always tell me, there are certain things that we can't do, and certain things that we need to look out for, like border patrol, right? Because it's super prevalent where I'm from, which includes her not being able to drop me off at college, right? Her not being able to go back home for her parents' passings, or be able to see my brother back in Mexico for a very, very long time. And so these are real families who are affected, right? And we are here to help them and to fight for them, right? To fight for me and my mom and every other mixed status family or single status family that is here to be united, because we all deserve to be here. We've worked really, really hard. And I remember back in 2016, I went to a political rally, right? Less than a week before Super Tuesday, before I got a chance to vote. And I voted, and at the end of the day, we all know the results from that. And I didn't know how to tell my mom that I didn't do absolutely everything I could to get her elected, right? I didn't know how to apologize for me letting her down. I didn't know how to apologize for what was to come because I couldn't protect her. We tried really, really hard, right? And unfortunately, we know enough now that voting isn't the only thing that we can do, right? We need to get active, we need to get mobilized, we need to get involved, because there are people who are counting on us, right? All across the country, all across the United States, all across Las Americas, because that's where the problem is, right? That's where we need to put in our resources, and Beto has an amazing plan to get that done. And so I'm here because my mom sacrificed everything to cross borders and to give my family a better opportunity and in the country of dreams, right? That's why we're here, because we want to contribute, we want to make this a better place for everyone, and there's absolutely no one that I trust more to make that happen than Beto, born and raised on the border, because not until the 2018 election, we felt like there was really much hope. My mom and I went to go see Beto for the first time back in February of 2018, and that's the first time we really felt hope again. And so I quit my job as an educator, as an ESL educator, to put all of my efforts into getting Beto elected into the U.S. Senate, because that's what my family deserved, that's what my students who were new to the country and didn't know English deserved. Merecían alguien que los puede representar en su propio lenguaje, right? Like, it was really important to me and to my students for them to be able to have a representative that spoke their native language, because that's completely necessary, and we should be able to communicate with our representatives effectively. And that's exactly what Beto provided, or would have provided for me and my family. But that's also why we're here, right? Because not just Texas deserves that representation, pero todo el mundo en los Estados Unidos, right? Everyone in the United States, whether you are a citizen, a non-citizen, a dreamer, or the original dreamers, right? Their parents, we all deserve the opportunity. We all deserve fair representation. And that's exactly what Beto's here to do. And we need everyone to make that happen, right? We all need to be united. We are not here to write anyone off. We are here to bring them in and get this work done and progress our country forward. So without further ado, I want to introduce y'all to Nuestra Esperanza, my family's hope, Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you all. Thank you all for spending part of your Sunday with us, welcoming a stranger from far west Texas into your community, back to your community. Annie was just reminding me that the last time we saw each other was here in Nashua at a town hall at the Nashua Community College. So our gratitude to everyone who's welcoming us back, and everyone who's here on one of the most important issues that we could be talking about and working on at this moment, immigration. And how we treat our fellow human beings, those who are in our communities and in many cases have been here for decades, and those who are just arriving right now at this moment, having survived one of the most perilous journeys that we can imagine, coming from half a world away, other continents, crossing oceans, and those who've walked almost the length of the Western Hemisphere, seeking shelter and refuge and safety and asylum in a country comprised of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants from the world over. So my gratitude, and I want to make very clear, if you are a supporter of mine, I'm grateful for the support. If you're a supporter of someone else's, I'm glad that you're here as well. If you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're an independent, if you do not vote because you choose not to, cannot vote because of your immigration status, no me importa. All that matters is that you're here, we're together, and we have a chance to listen to one another. So that's my goal in today's conversation. I want to thank Reverend Palm for opening up this house of worship to all of us, and for the conversation that she helped to facilitate beforehand, and for introducing us to Olympia, her daughter, kind of a reminder of why we're all doing this in the first place. One of the cutest kids who wanted to make sure that she had her say in the conversation earlier, and you can kind of hear her in the back of the room as well. So Reverend Palm, thank you and your family, and baby Olympia, there she is. Representative Custer, thank you for having gone to the border. And as you just pointed out, this was not your first visit to the border. In the wake of the incredibly inhumane and cruel family separation policies, Representative Custer was on the border to see those people, get to meet them if she could for herself, and then report back to you, her constituents, just what was being done in your name and in the name of this country. She's back at it, having just returned right now. And I'm grateful for that, because we are casi almost 2,000 miles from my hometown of El Paso, with Ciudad Juarez forming the largest binational community in the hemisphere, maybe the largest in the world. And sometimes we feel like we're forgotten or not known to begin with. And what is happening in our community, these children's detention centers, may be lost on everyone else. So to have somebody travel those 2,000 miles to come to our part of the world means everything to us. So we're grateful for your leadership and what you're doing for this country right now as well. Thank you. And Carla, thank you for being willing to share your very personal story and what motivates you to be involved in the political process in our democracy, and very grateful to have you on this team as well. So thank you, very grateful. Gracias, le agradezco. My thoughts right now, and I think I may speak for many of us, are with our fellow Americans who today especially live in fear or just outright terror of being deported back to a country which in many instances they have not been to, not in years, but not in decades. Firmly planted their roots here in Nashua or El Paso, Texas, or any town, USA, have raised their U.S. citizen children here, have contributed far more than they have ever taken. In fact, we all know, very often working the toughest, the hardest, the most backbreaking jobs that are available in the United States of America today. Very often, the very same jobs that no one born in the United States of America today wants to or is willing to work. And if they are lucky, those undocumented immigrants that I'm referring to are making a minimum wage. In my home state, that's $7.25 an hour. Far too often, they're making something less than a minimum wage, if they make anything at all. Their immigration status used as leverage against them, being kept in some kind of modern day bondage in this country in the year 2019. And in addition, y además, on the border and away from the border, we are detaining, incarcerating children at record numbers. Somebody in El Paso, Texas described this to me as the largest mass incarceration of children who have committed no crime whatsoever since the internment of Japanese American children beginning in 1942 in this very country, something for which we have apologized officially in the United States of America, and something that I think every single one of us at least would claim to oppose if we were alive at the time and in a position to do something about it. I'll also call to your attention the fact that 10 days ago, we just celebrated the 243rd anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And worth noting that that document begins, unlike almost every other nation on the face of the planet, not with a call to common race or ethnicity or ancestry, but this idea that we are all created equal. And that this country, which has welcomed immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over, is the greatest country on the face of the planet today because we are a country comprised of the people of the planet. The way someone put this to me, your ancestors may have come to what is now the United States of America 10,000 years ago in a land bridge connecting Siberia to Alaska. Your ancestors may have been kidnapped in West Africa or Central Africa, brought here in the Middle Passage, forced to build the wealth and the success of this country through their sweat on their backs, denied the benefit of what their labor produced, and to only know that their heirs were also denied full participation in the success or the greatness of this country. Your ancestors may have come over on the Mayflower, or like the O'Rourkes fleeing famine in Ireland, famine that claimed the lives of more than 1 million people back in the home country, coming to this place, perhaps the only one that would accept us. There are millions of stories, all of us coming over in a different ship, as John Lewis, our former colleague, or my former colleague, your current colleague would say, but now all of us in the same boat. And we lose sight of our origin and who we are and how we came together at our peril. In other words, if immigration is a problem, it is the best possible problem that this country could have. In my hometown of El Paso, about a quarter of those with whom I live were born in another country. Now that's the official measure. Unofficially, including undocumented immigrants, the number's got to be a lot higher. And the way I look at this, those immigrants, those asylum seekers chose us. They left their hometown, their family, their language, very often their culture, and certainly their country, to start anew as strangers in a strange land, to do better for themselves and for their kids, but also to do better for all of us, and they have. El Paso, Texas today is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And it's safe not despite, but because it is a city of immigrants. Their very presence has added to our security and to our safety. And when I listen to law enforcement leaders, they tell me that when immigrants, undocumented, documented, or otherwise, fear working with law enforcement, we are demonstrably less safe. Fewer people stand up to report a crime, or to serve as a witness, or to testify in a trial, or to work together in common purpose for the common cause of improving and strengthening our communities. So what Donald Trump is doing today across this country, in the name of safety and security, will make us less safe and less secure as a result, will tarnish the great tradition of this country, and will be a stain on our conscience for as long as we allow this to persist. So how do we meet this challenge? I got a window into that in Peterborough 2 nights ago. It was one of these Lights for Liberty events. You all may have hosted one here in Nashua, where people came out and stood up against the cruel practices of this administration, and for those kids who are being detained right now, in some cases, as Annie said, separated from their parents, knowing not when or if they are ever going to see them again. Parents who may have already been deported back 2,000 miles away to the very countries from which they fled in the first place. Children who will have a lasting trauma connected to what we have done to them. I've been there when a Catholic charity in El Paso, Texas, Annunciation House, has facilitated the reunification of some of those families. I saw an 8-year-old girl who's seeing her mom for the first time in months. And unlike my 8-year-old son, Henry, when he has not seen me for months, there was no smile on that girl's face. There was no impatience to tell her mother what she had done or seen or learned or the friends that she had made. There were no tears rolling down her face. There was no emotion. There was nothing. There was an absolute vacant expression on that kid's face, which to me says that she is unable to connect again with the one person with whom she associates the greatest pain that a child could ever feel. Imagine what that feels like. To show up here in the United States, having survived that 2,000-mile journey, some of it on foot, some of it atop a train, not inside of it, called the Beast or La Bestia, which has claimed the lives of countless asylum seekers and refugees. And just when you have finally arrived at that destination and your expectation of safety and shelter, to literally be torn from the arms of your mother and placed in a cage and then housed with other kids in a cinder block cell to sleep on that concrete floor under an aluminum blanket. I don't know what that would do to my kids. I don't know what that would do to me as a parent. That is exactly what we are doing to our fellow human beings right now. And in this great democracy, not a single one of us can take an ounce of comfort knowing that Donald Trump ordered this inhumanity. In a government of, by, and for the people, it is up to every single one of us to change this. I mentioned the internment of Japanese Americans. Some of you know the story of the St. Louis setting sail from Hamburg in 1939 with 950 Jewish refugees aboard, children, women, and men, denied the ability to dock here in the United States of America by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, sent right back across the Atlantic where more than 250 of those passengers, children, women, and men, would be slaughtered in the Holocaust. That is on this country. It is on every single one of us. But seeing those people in Peterborough, you today here in Nashua, knowing that in countless cities across the United States, folks stood up to be counted, held vigil, testified to their fellow Americans what was being done in their name, I'm confident that that begins to produce the political will to force the change that we want to see. And I've seen that in some instances already. More than a year ago, after the family separation policy began, in a little community outside of El Paso in the desert, the Trump administration constructed a tent city that they called Tornillo. And this is where they were keeping those kids. And on Father's Day a year ago, with 24 hours notice, as soon as we knew these tents were going up, more than 1,000 people descended on that community, lifted their voices, and made sure that the kids inside those tents knew that we were out there and that we knew that they were in there and that we were going to do everything within our power to connect them with their families and free them from this captivity. Within months, that zero tolerance policy had been ended, and within a few months more, Tornillo was closed down, not to reopen again. Now listen, that is only one small victory in a much larger battle and effort on the part of all of us. But I am confident if we continue to raise our voices and bring more Americans into the conversation and don't, as Carla said, write anybody off. Again, we do not care what political party you belong to, what your ultimate vision of immigration reform is. But if we can make things better right now while we have the opportunity, then we absolutely must. Y por último, last thing. In addition to ensuring that we never again cage another child or separate another family, and move every mountain, bear every burden, pay every price to make sure that we reunify those families and especially those kids who have been separated already, let's do the following. Let's work together as a country and with the other countries of the Western Hemisphere to address the conditions in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador that would ever compel somebody to leave those countries in the first place. Let's make sure that at our border we follow our own asylum laws and then rewrite our laws to ensure that no one is ever again criminally prosecuted for doing what any human would do given the same set of choices and same set of circumstances. Let's institute a family case management program that frees these people from detention in these cinder block cells to be cared for in the community right here at a fraction of the cost, and to the restoration of our humanity and our dignity and the humanity and dignity of those in our care. Make sure that they follow our laws and add to the genius and the greatness and the success of this country. Let's free those who are already here from any fear of deportation. More than 1 million dreamers, this is their true home country. Let's make them U.S. citizens as soon as we humanly can. Their brothers and sisters, their parents, the original dreamers, millions more all over the United States of America. Allow them to come forward, register with the government, pay any back taxes that they owe, although we know they paid far more into this government and our system than they've ever received in benefits or anything that they could possibly take out, and then allow them to contribute to their full potential as legal permanent residents, and then ultimately, I hope, as U.S. citizens. And then this, perhaps in part inspired, but what I've learned here by the Granite State Organizing Project, by faith leaders, by those of you who are standing up at this defining moment of truth. If this community wants to sponsor a refugee or a family petitioning asylum, let's change the law to allow you to do that. If you have the capacity, the resources, the goodwill to do the right thing in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, knowing that the benefit ultimately accrues not to the immigrant or to her family, but to all of us as a country, let's allow you by law to do the right thing. When we live up to our values and our conscience, there is no stopping this country. So thank you for having us out. Looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Cynthia Cano, who's at the back of the center aisle, has a microphone. She will bring that to you and will bring you into the conversation. Ms. Cano.
If you want to raise your hand, I will go to you. I'm looking for a hand.
Aquí.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My name is Krishna. I've been a longtime resident of Nashua, New Hampshire. I love what you're doing for the current crisis, but being a president is far more than just that. You know it, and I know it. We're carried away by the passion of the moment, but there are huge problems facing us. There's student loans. There's any number of other things that are going on. Could you please spend a little time talking about a few of those things and what President Beto would do for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Krishna, thank you for asking the question. And just a point of clarification, you may be wondering, why in the heck did this guy not talk about health care? Why did he not talk about the economy? Why did he talk about student loan debt? Why did he talk about climate? This meeting we wanted to organize around the issue of immigration. I did not want to sell you on my candidacy to be the nominee, but since you asked, I want to make sure that I'm responsive to the question. Really, I think we can look at every challenge that we face in the same light as we're looking at this current challenge when it comes to immigration and asylum seekers. What if we really lived up to the values that we profess to ourselves, our kids, in the rest of the world? What if we ensured that everyone was well enough to live to their full potential, to work, to preach, to go to school, to raise their families, guaranteed, high quality, universal health care, enrolling everyone who is not covered today in Medicare, everyone who is insufficiently covered, can't afford their copays or their deductibles or their premiums into Medicare as well, but for those who have employer-sponsored insurance, or members of unions who have fought for health insurance plans that they like because they work for them and their families, able to keep them. You get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality care, and you preserve choice. Here in New Hampshire, on this other issue that you mentioned, Krishna, we have the highest level of student loan indebtedness in the country, making it really hard for young people to stay here or to choose to come back to New Hampshire. How do we address this issue? Let's make the first 2 years of college absolutely free. Earn that associate's degree without paying a dime, or 2 years to that bachelor's. And then a 4-year education, debt-free, and debt-free not just for tuition, but for room and board and books, the full cost for the full ride for lower income and middle income students. And then for those who have some of that outstanding student loan debt right now, we will institute an aggressive public service debt forgiveness program. Right now, you have to teach school for 10 years, have 10 years of on-time loan repayments, and then you have like a 1% chance that the government's going to forgive that loan. In our administration, we will forgive the entirety of your student loan debt on day one if you commit yourself to a career of public service. That's teaching or serving as a public school educator in one of our great schools, or maybe working with Annie, ensuring that we fill one of the 40,000 funded but unfilled positions in the VA to take care of veterans who've borne the battle for the rest of us. And then maybe just one more big picture issue before I get to your questions on climate and the environment. Having just hiked the flume earlier today outside of Lincoln, I want to make sure that when scientists have told us that the storms and the floods and the droughts and the fires that we're seeing right now were not caused by God, nor by Mother Nature, but by all of us, by our emissions, by our excesses, by our inaction in the face of the facts and the science. And those same scientists say that we've got 10 years left to us to keep this planet from cooking another 2 degrees Celsius, after which what we're seeing right now is going to pale in comparison for our kids and our grandkids. I want to make sure that every single one of us does all that we can to make sure that the generations that follow us can live in the communities that we call home today. So that means freeing ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, embracing renewable energy technology and the high wage, high skill, high value jobs that come with that, ensuring that rural communities and farmers can play their part, planting cover crops, regenerative agriculture and ranching, and then bringing the other countries of the planet together to make sure that we are all doing everything within our power while we still can. That's the United States of America, living up to our promise and our potential. Thanks for asking, Krishna.
Hi. Hi.
Hi there.
I'm Danielle.
Danielle.
Did you go to college?
Yes.
Where?
Columbia.
Columbia University?
Yeah, New York City.
Gotcha. What would you do about opioid abuse in the state of New Hampshire if you became president?
Thank you, Daniel, for asking the question. I'm going to follow the lead of New Hampshire. I'm going to follow the lead of Annie Custer on this challenge. I have learned by listening to people in this state that you are innovating in the treatment and care for those who have addictions that in almost every instance began with a legally prescribed pharmaceutical. Those who are at risk of overdosing are not criminals in my mind, are not a problem for the criminal justice system. They are a public health opportunity. Annie shared with me what some innovative cities in the state are already doing. I believe Manchester has a safe stations program. Go into any and Nashua go into any fire station, and without the risk of being criminally justice involved or being arrested or prosecuted, you can get the help that will literally save your life. I know that Representative Custer has been working on a pilot program to make sure that if you are criminally justice involved and are incarcerated, that you get the mental health care treatment and substance abuse help that you need that could literally save your life, get you back on your feet, and put you on a better track. But Danielle, I also want to make sure that we hold Purdue Pharma and the pharmaceutical corporations who have made billions of dollars off of this crisis that has consumed the lives of tens of thousands of Americans, that they're held culpable and responsible, and that there's justice at the end of the day, because without that you have impunity, and you will continue to see the same problem manifest itself here in New Hampshire and across this country. So funding for long-term care, treatment, recovery, accountability for those who helped to create the problem in the first place, and then removing this from the purview of the criminal justice system for the victims of this problem, and ensuring that it becomes a public health opportunity for our country. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate that.
To your right.
Yeah. Hey there.
Hey, good to see you again.
Likewise.
Welcome back. I just wanted to question about criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
Many candidates, including yourself, have talked about making changes to our system. And I agree that we should look at rehabilitation efforts over incarceration for those who have committed low-level nonviolent crimes. But I think most people agree that we need to hold violent domestic violence offenders and sexual predators accountable. But too many candidates are promoting reform efforts that don't treat nonviolent and violent crimes differently, and as a result, dangerous policies may be introduced across the country. If elected, how do you plan to ensure that victims' rights are not trampled and that public safety isn't diminished by these emerging criminal justice reform efforts?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for distinguishing between nonviolent drug crimes, for example, including possession of marijuana, a substance that's legal in most states in the country right now, but for which in some states you can still be locked up, serve time, upon release, be forced to check a box on every employment application form going forward, consigning you to a much more limited future, narrowed options, and perhaps a return back into incarceration at some point. At least that's a trend that we see. We've got 2.3 million of our fellow Americans locked up right now as we enjoy our freedom on this beautiful day. More people in our prisons than are incarcerated on any other country on the face of the planet right now. So making sure that we end a war on drugs that has become a war on communities, some communities more than others, is fundamental to addressing this. Getting for-profit prison companies out of the mix altogether. No one should make a profit on denying you your liberty and your freedom, and yet that's exactly what we're doing. And then making sure that those who truly pose a threat or a risk or danger to our families, to our communities, that we focus our criminal justice resources on them. Jeffrey Epstein, as just the most recent example of what you described, the ability to purchase not just influence and access, but alternate outcomes from what any other American would be able to expect in the criminal justice system shows you some of the challenges that we have right now. Those who prey on their fellow human beings, we've got to make sure that we protect our communities. And then I think I understood from your question, we also have to invest in the recovery of their victims, the trauma that has been inflicted, the ability for them to be able to get back on their feet and to be taken care of going forward. I want to make sure that we do that as well. And again, to your question, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. We just got to distinguish the type of crimes that are being committed. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Amy. I came up from Massachusetts to see you. Thank you for coming to New England. My husband here is an immigrant from Brazil. And one of the proudest days of my life was 2013 when we were able to legalize him and get him a green card, and then again in 2016 when he became a U.S. citizen. So this issue is very personal to us.
Yeah.
I lived the fear that Carla described about of having a mixed status family. And I have a lot of hope that some of the atrocities that are happening down at the border, as well as within ICE itself with raids and a step up in enforcement here in the New England area, I'm hoping that this is going to come to an end. And I'm hoping somebody else in this church might ask you, how do you plan to end that? But I want to talk about accountability.
Yeah.
President Beto, as a president, how would you hold people accountable? I know that a lot of these directives are coming right from the top, from Trump, people like Stephen Miller in his year, but former Department of Homeland Security head Kristen Nielsen sat there and watched and said, I'm taking orders from the top as we separated children from their mothers, their fathers, their family members at the border. Current director of ICE, Ken Cuccinelli, says, we're going to do raids. There's nothing I can do about it. How do you plan to hold these people accountable to send a message to let any other future president know that we're not putting up with this from them? This is never going to happen again.
Thank you for the question. You know, you're anticipating the I was just following orders defense, right? And I was discussing with Reverend Rockwell something that I heard when I visited the McAllen Border Patrol Station last year in the immediate wake of the zero tolerance family separation policy. And I went into one of these cells where young mothers, you know, some 16 years old, 17 years old, were with their very young children. Unbeknownst to them, they had just turned themselves in, self-arrested in the parlance of the Border Patrol. Unbeknownst to them and to their kids, they were about to be separated by force. They just survived, they'd just gotten here. What's next? They did not know. And listening to their stories, hearing how they hope to be able to connect with family deeper into the interior of the United States was incredibly heartbreaking. And as we left the cell and I was talking to the Border Patrol agent in charge, I said, you know, ma'am, when we were talking earlier, you told me that you have young children as well. This has got to be the toughest job in the world. It's got to break your heart. And she said something that I found really interesting. She said, you know, in a way, I think we're doing these families a favor. We're taking kids away from parents who have put them through this torturous journey, who've effectively abused them. These people are unfit to raise these kids. And, you know, I think we may leap to judgment, but we might also want to think about what does she have to rationalize in her head in order to do that job? How can she make it okay for herself and sleep at night when she's taking a little girl away from her mother? That's what she had to tell herself. And so you ask what we do, you know, a president who gives permission, who describes asylum seekers as an infestation, which is what you describe a cockroach or a termite as, something subhuman. You've given tacit permission for people to do this. It does not absolve them of their responsibility or culpability, but I think we have to understand how this begins in the first place. And so yes, anyone who is responsible for any one of the deaths that we've seen so far, 6 children that we know of in our custody over the last 10 months, 1 more child who died shortly after being in our custody, they will be held responsible and accountable. Justice must be served, or we have sent the signal that you can do this again without fear of justice. Those at the top who gave the orders to contravene our own asylum laws and to treat our fellow human beings in this way, there has got to be accountability. But I do want to say this, and it's why meetings like this one are so important, and your willingness to share what you learn with your neighbors and your family and friends is critical. I really do think this is on all of us for as long as it happens. You may or may not know this, but over the last 20 years, 8,000 people have died. Not detained, not deported, not separated, not caged, died crossing into the United States. As we have built walls and fences and militarized our border, we have pushed people out to the remote, deadliest stretches of the U.S.-Mexico border. Those deaths, the current incarceration, the underclass that we have created in this country without rights on all of us, and so easy to turn your gaze from or turn your back on, but the fact that you're willing to squarely look it in the face, make sure that we do something about it, and then ask the question about what the consequences are going forward, it's the only way that we're going to change this and hopefully change it before it's too late. So thanks for asking the question.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
we have time for 2 more.
Hey there.
Hi, Beto. I'm sorry. I've got some throat issues. I just turned 70, so this is that stage in my life where I'm looking back, looking forward, and sort of putting pieces together. And along the same vein as her question, only on a national scale, I see our country right now having one of its biggest challenges being trust and faith. That there's been such a climate of lies and disinformation. People don't know who or what to believe. How would your administration tackle that issue, restoring some credibility, transparency, and accountability?
Yeah. Love your question. First, I think speaking the truth and not lying is a great place for us to start. Believing in science and the scientists and the facts to make the policy, whether it's on climate, whether it's on health, whether it's on immigration and asylum policy, or foreign policy as it pertains to the Western Hemisphere. And then you used a really important word, transparency, being accountable in meetings just like this one, answering to those who placed me in the position of public trust in the first place, reminding myself who it is I serve at the end of the day, not corporations, not special interests, not the next election, not the current poll, but you and the next generation who are depending on us at this defining moment. And if there were ever a moment for us to have this conversation, it is this one. During this administration, committing not just these unspeakable acts of cruelty and inhumanity, but I don't know if you saw some of the president's comments today. 4 duly elected representatives in the U.S. House telling them to go back to their country, 3 of them born here in the United States, based on their ethnicity, in their race, not too far afield from conflating a Muslim American woman who serves in the House with the terrorists of 9/11, which he has done. Not too far afield from the 3 years of hate crime increase in this country, not just that it offends our sensibilities or that he's lying to us or not being transparent, but that he's changing the character of America in real time, giving permission not just to those Border Patrol agents, but to folks on the street to be hateful and not to work in love, in compassion, and in empathy. So I hope to be able to demonstrate those traits and attributes as your president, and to reflect all of the amazing people of good conscience that I'm meeting all across this country, and to bring them all into the solutions that we're looking for. That's what I hope to be able to do for you as president. Thanks for asking.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
this is our last question.
Hi.
Hi there.
I have 2 questions, but I'll just ask one. Talking about the opioid crisis, being a chronic pain patient, there are millions of us across the world, of this country, and we have been blamed, included in the people who are abusing opioids. What about the people who are dying of fentanyl? The fentanyl comes from China.
That's right.
What is being done to stop that?
Thanks for asking the question. You know, the vast majority of fentanyl that's coming into this country is coming in through the U.S. mails and is coming in through legal ports of entry, not in between the ports of entry, not where the Border Patrol ranges or where the wall is going to be built right now. I think there are some real common sense solutions to better scanning the mail that's coming into this country in the first place, and then investing in those ports of entry that connect us with Mexico and the rest of the world, where 90% of everyone and everything that ever comes into this country, including fentanyl, first passes. So staffing up, not with Border Patrol or military enforcement, but customs officers who facilitate trade and travel and the lawful passing of tourists and people who want to join their family, and then preventing illegal drugs and human smuggling from taking place at our border. That makes a ton of sense to me. And when I was a member of Congress, I introduced legislation to do this with my Republican senior senator, John Cornyn, showing that a Republican and a Democrat, a House member and a senator could find common ground on this issue. We don't need walls. We don't need to militarize. We don't need to scare people about the border. We just need to do sensible things and enact them in our policies. And thank you for asking the question. Appreciate that. Thank you all for coming out here today. I'm really grateful. ¿Está todo? Okay. Cynthia is telling us that that is the answer. I'll make sure that why don't I just take this additional question? You've been persistent, patient? Yep. Here, take mine.
I'm just going to hit record here. I wasn't really prepared. So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for coming to New Hampshire. And it takes a lot of guts to run for president, so I appreciate you running for president. That being said, I'm originally from Massachusetts. Have you ever heard the name Matthew Denise? He was a young man, I believe he was 21 or 22 years old. He was from Milford, Massachusetts. He was run over by an illegal alien driver. He was dragged a quarter of a mile in the wheel well of this illegal alien truck driver in his truck. He had his little child in the truck. He was driving drunk, and people pounded on the glass of the truck to stop, and he kept on going, and he actually backed up and ran over him more. This young man was trying to ride his motorcycle. My question for you is, what do you say to his mom? You know, her son, Matthew Denise, would be alive today. Right now, today in 2019, this young man would be alive if the border was actually enforced, if we actually enforced our existing laws. So what would you say to that mother whose son should be alive, but again, if the law was actually enforced, her son would be alive? What is your answer to that question, please, sir? Thank you.
Thank you for being here. You know, I would say to Matthew's mother, and I think we all feel the same way, we're incredibly sorry for her loss. It should not have happened. The person responsible should be fully prosecuted for what he did. But the implication that you're attempting to give to everybody here is that undocumented immigrants are a danger and a threat to this country. And what I will tell you, I was asked a question about the facts earlier, and whether we can trust one another anymore. We know that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, commit crimes at a far lower rate than those who are born in this country. And I mentioned that El Paso, Texas is one of the safest cities in the U.S. It is not an outlier amongst cities of immigrants. If you look at McAllen, Texas, if you look at San Diego, California, these communities of immigrants are far safer than communities deeper into the interior. But to the spirit of your question, I allowed you to speak. I allowed you to speak. I allowed you to speak. Let me get my answer to you.
Denying the fact that his son...
Allow me to answer. Allow me to answer.
Are you denying that fact?
Let him speak, he'll tell you.
I heard what you said. We listened to you. We gave you the microphone even after you ended the meeting.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
So, I'd like you to actually answer my question.
So I think what we can all also agree on is that there should be an orderly, lawful, safe process and path to come to this country. And what I just said earlier, and I'm sure you heard me, was that those who are here and are undocumented should come forward, register with the government, be able to lawfully obtain a driver's license. We will all know who is in our community after that process takes place. Those who want to come here and work jobs that no American will take, or join their families, or go to school, or flee persecution, or crushing poverty, or hunger, should have a lawful, legal, safe, orderly path to do so as well. As president, I want to make sure that we do that. So, appreciate your question. I answered your question. I answered your question.
You deny that her son would be alive today if the laws weren't enforced? Yes or no?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for having us out here today. Thank you for coming. Gracias.